Did you know that one of the most famous rulers in history, whose golden tomb shocked the world, became Pharaoh when he was just 9 years old, a child? Not even old enough to ride a horse alone in most cultures, and yet he was crowned king of the most powerful empire on earth. Tutankhamun, or King Tut as many call him today, ruled Egypt for only about a decade. And yet over 3,000 years later, his name still echoes through museums, documentaries, conspiracy theories, and the dreams of every archaeologist who's ever brushed sand off an ancient stone. Why? Why him? He wasn't the longest ruling pharaoh, he didn't build the biggest pyramids, his armies didn't conquer vast new lands, and for centuries, even his name had been forgotten. But all of that changed in 1922, when his untouched tomb was discovered by Howard Carter, and the world was suddenly staring into the eyes of a long-dead boy king, his golden death mask gleaming in candlelight. What followed was a whirlwind of mystery, a so-called curse of the pharaohs, sudden deaths, unexplained events. But the real story, the true story, is even more haunting than the legends. Because the tragedy of Tutankhamun isn't just about what happened after he died. It's about what he lived through before his death. A child thrust into power, surrounded by shadows, gods, and betrayals. His reign was short, but his story is one of the most enduring in human history, not because he was the greatest king, but because he was the most human. And once you understand what really happened to him, you'll see why Tutankhamun may be the most important pharaoh we've ever found. Tutankhamun did not choose to become pharaoh. He was chosen by blood, by prophecy, by political desperation. In 1332 BC, the throne of Egypt was in chaos. The heretic king Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's father, or perhaps his older brother, had shaken the religious foundation of the empire, abandoning the old gods of Egypt in favor of a single deity, Aten, the sun disk. Priests had been stripped of their power, temples closed, ancient traditions abandoned. The kingdom teetered on the edge of collapse. And then Akhenaten vanished. Dead? Assassinated? Exiled? History doesn't say for certain, but what it does say is this. After the fall of Akhenaten, a child was crowned pharaoh. His name was Tutankhaten, the living image of Aten, a name that would soon be changed. He was just 9 years old. Imagine the scene, a boy barely taller than the crook and flail he was handed. Standing beneath towering columns in Thebes or Memphis, draped in gold, eyes wide with fear or awe. Around him, older men knelt, chanted, and pledged allegiance, not to a seasoned warrior or wise sage, but to a child, a god king in a body not yet finished growing. But this coronation wasn't about Tutankhamun, not really. It was about power. The real control lay in the hands of Vizier I and the General Horemheb, men of ambition, experience, and patience. They needed a figurehead, a symbol, to restore Egypt's shattered image. And who better than the son of a god king? The first order of business? Erase the past. The young pharaoh's name was changed from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun. It was a signal to the people. The old gods were back. Amun, the hidden one, the king of gods, had returned. The temples reopened. The priests reclaimed their voices. The statues of Aten were toppled and buried. And in the center of it all, a boy king sat on a throne far too big for his feet. But behind the golden throne, the whispers never stopped. Was Tutankhamun truly a god, or just a pawn? His family lineage was tangled with incest, leaving him with frail health and possibly genetic disorders. He walked with a cane, suffered from malaria, and had a clubfoot. In public, he wore the cobra crown and lion's tail of pharaohs. In private, he limped. And yet, despite his youth and weakness, something about him endures. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity with which he bore the weight of a kingdom. Perhaps it was the tragedy of a life lived in shadow. Or perhaps it's because, in the silence of his tomb, we saw him not as a myth, but as a boy. A boy forced to wear the mask of a god in a world of ghosts. When Tutankhamun ascended to the throne, he was just a child seated on a golden chair, far too large for his small frame. His feet didn't reach the floor. His voice likely unsteady and boyish, was now the voice of the divine. In theory, he was Pharaoh, the living god, chosen by the sun, the absolute ruler of the two lands. But in reality, Egypt wasn't ruled by a boy, it was ruled by shadows. Behind the grand ceremonies and regal titles, a silent war was being waged. Power didn't rest in the hands of a child. It rested with the high officials and priests who had outlasted kings and buried gods. Chief among them were I, a seasoned vizier, and Horemheb, the powerful general of the army. These men weren't caretakers. They were architects of influence, skilled manipulators who could pull the strings of power while standing behind the curtain. Tutankhamun was their puppet king, yet one who wore the crown of Horus. And that crown came with baggage. Egypt had just emerged from a religious and political earthquake. Tutankhamun's father, Akhenaten, had tried to reshape Egypt's soul. He abandoned the ancient gods, closed their temples, and declared that only one god, the sun disk Aten, was to be worshipped. Statues were smashed, names were erased, and even the powerful god Amun was silenced. It was the first recorded monotheism in history, but it came at a cost: famine, rebellion, and national disarray. Now a child king had to fix all that. Tutankhamun's reign began under a different name, Tutankhaten, living image of Aten, a name echoing his father's radical theology. But by year 3 of his reign, still just a boy, the name changed to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. This wasn't just a rebranding, it was a public statement of reversal. The temples of Amun reopened, old priesthoods were reinstated, statues of forgotten gods were dusted off and placed back on their pedestals. It was a restoration of the divine order, and the young king was its symbolic face. But how much of this did Tutankhamun understand? Was he merely a signature on decrees he didn't write? Or did he slowly begin to grasp the throne he sat on? The expectations, the manipulation, the dangers. We may never know, but the signs suggest he wasn't entirely blind. Archaeological records show that the boy king made visits across Egypt, especially to Karnak and Thebes, the religious heart of the nation. His cartouches, his royal seals, began appearing in restored temples. He even ordered the construction of monuments and the commissioning of statues bearing his likeness. These were not the passive actions of a puppet. They were the movements of someone trying to claim the identity expected of him, however young and fragile. But even these actions were likely supervised and edited by the elders around him. I and Horemheb weren't just mentors, they were rivals, each with their own ambitions. I, the cunning courtier with priestly roots, saw himself as the political heir. Horemheb, the general, saw himself as the military future. They both needed the boy, but only until he became inconvenient. Tutankhamun's court was not a family, it was a den of serpents in linen robes. And in the midst of this dangerous political theater was another forgotten figure, Ankhesenamun, Tutankhamun's half-sister and queen. Likely just a teenager herself, she too had been thrust into power, expected to be both consort and counselor. Together, they were children wearing the masks of gods, trying to act like rulers in a world that devoured innocence. Their marriage may have been genuine, an attempt at emotional connection in a palace of schemes, but it was also dynastic. Royal blood had to stay royal. And the future of Egypt depended on heirs. Yet, 2 mummified fetuses found in Tutankhamun's tomb suggest that tragedy haunted their efforts. The young queen's pregnancies ended in death, and their lineage was never secured. That failure wasn't just personal, it was political. Without a clear heir, the throne would become a battlefield. The boy king's health was another issue. Records and medical examinations of his remains tell a grim tale. A malformed left foot, evidence of malaria, and possibly a bone disorder. He likely walked with a cane, over 100 of which were found in his tomb. Imagine it, the divine Pharaoh, limping through the halls of Karnak, leaning on a staff, dressed in gold but broken in body. He may have ruled, but he never had a childhood. In every royal portrait, he is immortalized as a god, but the truth is more tragic. Behind the golden mask was a boy who inherited a kingdom divided by faith, ruled by men who whispered through walls, and carried the crushing weight of a legacy he barely had time to understand. The age of gods was ending, and Tutankhamun, the child king, was caught in the ruins. Tutankhamun died before he had the chance to become a man. Somewhere between the ages of 18 and 19, the young pharaoh's life came to a sudden end. The cause? Still debated. Malaria, a broken leg, a congenital disorder. Some even suggest murder. But whatever ended his reign, one thing is certain: Egypt wasn't ready. And neither was his tomb. The grand kings of Egypt, Ramses, Seti, Thutmose, they had towering temples carved into cliffs, endless corridors etched with spells, halls lined with golden statues. They had years, even decades, to build eternal homes. But Tutankhamun, his tomb was small, cramped, uneven, rushed. It was, archaeologists believe, never meant for a pharaoh. Its walls were hastily painted, some of the colors hadn't dried fully before sealing. The chambers were limited, barely 4 rooms, and the outer walls showed signs of last-minute construction. It was the resting place of a king who had died too soon in a court scrambling to hide weakness. And yet, it is the most famous tomb in human history. Why? Because it was untouched. For over 3,000 years, while other tombs were looted, defaced, emptied by time and greed, Tutankhamun's burial place remained sealed beneath the sands of the Valley of the Kings. It survived floods, tomb robbers, and dynasties. And when British archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered the sealed doorway in 1922, he saw something no living person had seen in 3 millennia. Gold. Everywhere. Sarcophagi nested within each other like sacred puzzles, thrones covered in gold leaf and lapis lazuli, chariots, statues, board games, perfumes, weapons, trumpets and sandals, still waiting where they had been placed by trembling priests in a rush. But most haunting of all was the mask. The funerary mask of Tutankhamun is now one of the most recognized objects on Earth. Made of solid gold inlaid with obsidian, lapis lazuli, and quartz, it isn't just beautiful, it's divine. It stares forward with calm serenity, crowned with the cobra and vulture, symbols of Upper and Lower Egypt, as if still ruling beyond death. But that mask also hides something. The mummy beneath it had suffered. The body was charred, possibly due to a rushed mummification process that used excessive oils. The chest was missing entirely, removed after death for reasons still unknown. One leg was broken, and some researchers claim his body may have been damaged during burial or shortly after. In life, he had been fragile. In death, even more so. Yet his legacy exploded with godlike force after Carter's discovery. The world was captivated. Newspapers printed headlines like "Pharaoh's Curse" and "The Boy King Rises Again." Egyptian motifs took over fashion, architecture, jewelry. The 1920s saw a wave of Tutmania, a cultural fascination that continues to this day. And with the fame came myths. The so-called Curse of the Pharaoh emerged after several members of Carter's team died under strange circumstances, illnesses, accidents, and infections. Though most of the deaths were explainable, the idea that Tutankhamun had reached beyond the grave to punish those who disturbed him became legend. Hollywood latched onto the tale. Mummy movies, horror stories, and ghost hunting shows still echo his name, but the truth is more powerful than fiction. Tutankhamun had been forgotten by history, his name erased from records, his reign considered unimportant. Yet fate preserved his tomb, hiding it until a new era was ready to rediscover it. And in doing so, the boy who ruled briefly became eternal. Today, his image is a symbol not just of ancient Egypt, but of the mystery and fragility of all human power. He reminds us that even the smallest voice, if preserved, can echo through the ages. He ruled for a decade. He was forgotten for 3 millennia. And now, he reigns in memory forever. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end. It was a crossing, a transformation, a journey as real and detailed as life itself. And for a pharaoh, this journey had to be perfect. Every amulet, every spell, every object in Tutankhamun's tomb served a purpose. The items weren't simply treasure. They were tools, chosen carefully to help the young king navigate the dangerous, sacred path through the underworld. This journey was believed to begin with the soul's separation from the body. In Egyptian theology, the soul was made up of several parts: Ka, Ba, Akh, each playing a role in death and resurrection. The Ka needed food and energy, hence the offerings. The Ba needed freedom to move, often represented with birds. And the Akh, the fully realized spirit, could only exist after divine judgment. But to reach that judgment, the dead had to pass through the Duat. The Duat was no peaceful dreamland. It was a nightmarish realm, filled with gates, monsters and gods that tested your soul. Serpents with legs, lakes of fire, guardians with lion heads and scorpion tails. Each hour brought new trials, and to survive them, the soul needed knowledge, secret names, sacred words, divine guidance. This is why the Book of the Dead, or more accurately the Book of Coming Forth by Day, was so important. It was not one book, but a collection of spells, incantations, and instructions inscribed on papyrus, coffins, and tomb walls. In Tutankhamun's tomb, parts of these texts were painted hastily but precisely: spells to open doors, words to repel demons, charms to restore his limbs. Everything needed to rebuild the body and guide the soul. Some of these were adapted specifically for him, written not by theologians in comfort, but by scribes in a rush to prepare the boy Pharaoh for eternity. And at the heart of it all was the most critical test, the weighing of the heart. The ancient Egyptians believed that after death, the heart, IB, was weighed on a golden scale against a feather. Not just any feather, the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and cosmic balance. If your heart was light, your soul could continue. If it was heavy with sin, the monster Amut, part lion, part hippo, part crocodile, would devour it. Eternal death. No second chance. That's why many tombs, including Tutankhamun's, included a heart scarab, a small amulet placed near the chest. It was meant to silence the heart from testifying against its owner. In spell 30b of the Book of the Dead, it pleads, "Do not stand as a witness against me. Do not make my name stink before the gods." Imagine that. Even a king, divine on earth, worried that his own heart might betray him before the gods. And yet, for all its detail, Tutankhamun's tomb was strangely incomplete. There was no full papyrus of the Book of the Dead, unlike other pharaohs. No grand spells carved deep into the burial chamber. Why? Again, it points to the suddenness of his death. Everything had to be done quickly, but even in haste, the rituals were honored. Even in a small tomb, the metaphysical map was followed. Some objects suggest that personal faith played a role too. The boy king may have truly believed in this journey, not just as royal obligation, but as personal hope. One item found was a small golden dagger, forged with meteoric iron. That's right, metal from a literal fallen star. The blade symbolized celestial power, the ability to cut through realms, even the sky itself. It was meant to protect him in the next world, against enemies no mortal could name. Then there were the Shabti figures, tiny statues meant to come alive in the afterlife and perform labor on behalf of the king. Over 400 of them were found, each inscribed with instructions, ready to serve. The boy who once needed servants in life would now be served eternally. And let's not forget the throne, gilded and engraved, showing Tutankhamun with his queen Ankhesenamun in an intimate, gentle pose. It's one of the most tender portrayals of affection in all Egyptian art, a reminder that even in preparing for eternity, love was not forgotten. In this way, the tomb becomes a reflection of the boy himself, half god, half child. Rushed, broken, sacred, hopeful. In life, he was a symbol, a divine figurehead thrust onto a throne. In death, he became a symbol again of belief, mystery, fragility, and the ancient human desire to live forever. And while the afterlife he envisioned was filled with monsters, fire, judgment, and silence, it was also filled with the possibility of light. With the hope that his soul would pass through the duat, ascend to the stars, and be reborn among the gods. And maybe, just maybe, that's why his tomb was preserved, not just by accident, but by design. A message from a forgotten pharaoh, echoing through stone and sand. I was here. I believed. I lived. I still live. Tutankhamun's death left more than a throne. It left a power vacuum. He was gone. Barely out of childhood, he vanished from the world stage without a clear heir. And in the shadows of his small tomb, questions began to spread like desert winds. Had the boy king really died of natural causes? Or had someone helped the gods decide his fate? Theories multiplied. A fracture at the back of his skull, crushed ribs, a shattered leg, and embalming so rushed that it caused his corpse to burn. Some believed he fell from a chariot. Others whispered poison, conspiracy, murder. Historians remain divided. But here's what we do know. The line of pharaohs was abruptly altered, and the people who rose to power after his death had everything to gain. His widow, Ankhesenamun, just a teenager herself, was left vulnerable. In desperation, she wrote a letter to the king of the Hittites, a foreign rival power. In the letter, preserved in ancient tablets, she pleaded, "My husband has died. I have no son. They say you have many sons. Send me one, and I will make him king of Egypt." Astonishing, an Egyptian queen offering the throne to a foreign prince. It was an act of rebellion, of fear, of defiance against whoever now controlled the palace. The Hittite prince was sent, but never arrived, assassinated en route. The message was clear. Someone powerful didn't want her plan to succeed. And soon after, she disappears from history. In her place rises Ai, an old courtier who had served under Akhenaten and then Tutankhamun. Suddenly he becomes pharaoh. And to legitimize his rule, he marries Ankhesenamun, possibly against her will. It's a story as ancient as it is modern. Political ambition masked by ritual, sealed by marriage, and sanitized by stone inscriptions. Ai ruled only briefly before Horemheb, a military general with no royal blood, seized power. He erased the names of the previous kings, including Tutankhamun and Ai, from temples and monuments. It was a deliberate cleansing, a resetting of history. And just like that, the boy king, once a god on earth, was forgotten. Tutankhamun's name nearly disappeared. No great obelisks bore his story. No towering pyramids shouted his glory. His tomb, so modest compared to the giants of earlier dynasties, was buried by rock slides and hidden by the very debris of time. Even his successors had tried to wipe him from existence. By all logic, Tutankhamun should have remained unknown forever. But fate had other plans. In the early 20th century, Egypt was at the center of global fascination. Archaeologists, some scholars, others little more than treasure hunters, dug feverishly through the Valley of the Kings, hoping to find something untouched. Most believed everything worth finding had already been found. But one man, Howard Carter, disagreed. He had a hunch based on an ancient cup, a few scattered references, and sheer obsession that one more tomb lay undiscovered. His patron, Lord Carnarvon, was nearly out of patience and money, but Carter insisted. One final season of digging. And in 1922, they found it. A single step, cut into the rock. Then a sealed doorway. And behind it, the most intact pharaonic tomb ever discovered. Inside, over 5,000 artifacts, gold shrines, chariots, thrones, a black and gold coffin, nested like a matryoshka doll within more coffins. And inside the final one, Tutankhamun himself. Mummified, mask intact, lying silently in the dark. The world erupted. Newspapers from London to New York splashed headlines of the boy king. His golden mask became an icon overnight. Egyptomania swept the world. Ironically, in death, he achieved the fame denied him in life. But something else came with his discovery: the curse. Shortly after entering the tomb, Lord Carnarvon died. A mosquito bite became infected. Then more deaths followed. Carter's pet canary eaten by a cobra, a symbol of Egyptian royalty. Others died mysteriously. The media ran wild. Tutankhamun's curse. Retribution from beyond the grave. Whether coincidence or legend, it added to his mythos. A forgotten boy, a silent tomb, and now, a ghost that haunted history. Tutankhamun's legacy was never meant to be eternal. In fact, it was almost entirely erased. He didn't conquer lands or change the face of Egypt. He didn't found a dynasty or leave behind a lineage. He ruled for less than a decade, died before reaching full adulthood, and was buried in a tomb so modest it seemed almost improvised. And yet today, he is the most recognized name in all of ancient Egyptian history. Not Ramses, not Akhenaten, not Cleopatra, but Tutankhamun, the boy who barely had time to rule. His image is now iconic. The golden death mask, gleaming with lapis lazuli and polished gold, is a symbol etched into global memory. And yet the man behind the mask remains largely unknowable. What draws us to him is not what he accomplished, but what was left undone. His reign was short and politically unremarkable, but the circumstances of his life and his rediscovery tell a much larger story. It is the story of a civilization's collapse, of a family's curse, of a child thrust into godhood without preparation. His memory survived not through monuments or military triumphs, but through accident, mystery, and the sheer fortune of a tomb hidden under centuries of rubble. His true legacy is that he gave modern civilization its clearest window into a world that time tried to bury. The artifacts found within his tomb told us how ancient Egyptians lived, worshipped, and imagined eternity. Without Tutankhamun, our understanding of the 18th dynasty would be far dimmer. He became the unexpected bridge between our age and theirs, not because he intended to be remembered, but because his obscurity preserved him from tomb robbers and the rewriting of history. Ironically, what made him insignificant in his own time became the very reason we know his name today. There's a quiet tragedy in all this. The boy who was treated as a divine figure was also a puppet in the hands of older, more powerful men. His short life was defined by decisions made around him, not by him. He restored traditional gods under pressure. He married strategically. He died mysteriously. Even his burial, which should have been an event of enormous national significance, was likely carried out hastily and without the grandeur expected of a pharaoh. What we celebrate today, the treasures, the mystery, the mask, are less a testament to his greatness and more a reflection of how little control he had over his fate. And yet, perhaps that's exactly why he fascinates us. Tutankhamun reminds us that history doesn't always reward the mighty or the successful. Sometimes it remembers the forgotten. Sometimes it immortalizes the fragile. And sometimes, all it takes is one crack in the earth, one overlooked doorway, and a single breathless moment of rediscovery to bring a soul back from silence. For more than 3,000 years, the name Tutankhamun faded from memory. No grand monuments bore his image. No scrolls told his story. His successors tried to erase all traces of the boy king, his family, and the heretical chapter they had written. His tomb was buried not only in stone and sand, but in deliberate silence. The 18th dynasty had moved on, the world had moved on, and so Tutankhamun disappeared, not as a pharaoh, but as a footnote. And yet, centuries later, his name would be spoken again, this time not in temples, but on the lips of explorers, archaeologists, and awestruck journalists. In 1922, Howard Carter's discovery would unravel everything. Behind the sealed doorway, hidden beneath collapsed huts and forgotten debris, lay an untouched tomb. Gold gleamed in the dim light of lanterns. Statues watched from the shadows. The scent of ancient oils still clung to the air. And in the innermost chamber, a boy's body lay cradled in golden myth. What Carter unearthed was more than a burial chamber. It was a time capsule. a snapshot of the ancient world in pristine condition. Unlike every other royal tomb that had been looted, Tutankhamun's remained sealed, preserved by accident and oversight. And so, the world met him not through dusty chronicles or ruined walls, but face to face in the glow of gold and mystery. For the first time in history, modern eyes could see what ancient death looked like in its full ceremonial power. Coffins inside coffins. A throne carved with intimate scenes. Daggers made from meteorite. Chariots, linen, and a lock of his wife's hair. It was as if time had blinked. Tutankhamun became a sensation. Headlines called him the Boy King. Rumors of a curse added to the fever. Exhibitions of his treasures drew millions. And yet, in all the spectacle, something deeper echoed. He was not just a curiosity, he was a mirror. In his fragile ribs and damaged skull, people saw the cost of power. In his ornate burial, they saw the hunger for immortality. In his obscurity, they saw the randomness of memory, how some names are shouted through time while others are swallowed whole. His death mask became the most recognizable artifact in archaeology, but beneath that gilded face was a story of pain, pressure, and politics. He limped through life. He suffered illness. He was surrounded by adults with their own agendas. He ruled because he was born into it, not because he chose it. And yet, through the smallest twist of fate, an undisturbed tomb, he outlived them all in memory. Today, Tutankhamun stands not only as a relic, but as a reminder that even the forgotten can become eternal. That history is full of silent figures whose lives mattered just as much as the conquerors and builders. That a boy with a cane, crowned too early and buried too quickly, can one day be the symbol of an entire civilization. Tutankhamun never asked to be remembered, but history remembered him anyway,